Good afternoon, Mr. Akhtar. You're going to be asked questions by Miss Graham, who's sitting at the end of the table here. Before we do that, will you repeat the words of the affirmation after me? I solemnly, sincerely, and truly.
I solemnly, truly,
Sincerely
and truly
declare and affirm
declare and affirm
that I will tell the truth,
that I will tell the truth,
the whole truth,
and
nothing but the truth.
nothing but the truth.
Miss Graham.
This witness is going to be taken by my learned junior, Miss Thompson.
Thank you. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
What is your full name, please?
Akhtar Ali.
How old are you, Mr. Ali?
65, sorry.
Thank you. And am I right to understand that you've provided the inquiry with your contact details?
Yes.
There's a black folder in front of you, Mr. Ali. If you could perhaps open that up, and I'll talk you through what's in it.
Yes.
At the front of the folder, there should be a statement that you gave to the inquiry. It's got the reference SPBI 00012. Do you see that there?
Yes. No, there's no two.
It may not have the reference number on it. Don't worry about
Right,
that.
okay. Mm-hmm.
That's just so that I can make sure the right document comes up on the screen in front of us. But just to be sure that we are looking at the same document, can we look at the first page of the document, please? And we see that it's a statement given by yourself via telephone on the 13th of December of 2021. Is that the same as the hard copy in front of you, Mr. Ali? It should be at the very front of the file, I think.
No, it's
at the
to
back,
the
I
back.
beg your pardon.
No, it's to the back, yeah.
It's not where I thought it was.
Yeah.
It's the final document in the bundle.
Yeah, by telephone call on the 13th of December 2021, yes.
That's right. I just wanted to be sure that we each had the same document in front of us. If we can perhaps scroll through that document to the final page, page 5 and paragraph 16. Do you have that before you?
Yeah, page 5, yes.
Yes. If it's easier for you, Mr. Ali, anything that I refer to is going to be brought up on the screen in front of you.
Right, okay.
If you find it easier to look at the screen, please do so. If you would rather work with the hard copy in the folder, you're
It's
welcome
all one,
to do
yes,
that.
thank you.
So at paragraph 16, your statement reads, I believe the facts stated in this witness statement are true. I understand that this statement may form part of the evidence before the inquiry and be published on the inquiry's website. Do you see that?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And do we see at the bottom of the page your signature?
That's right, yes.
And have you, in fact, signed every page of the statement?
Yes, I have.
Do we see in the final page that the date on which you signed the statement was the 31st of March of this year?
That's right.
Thank you. You should also find within that folder a statement that you gave to the Perk, the Police Independent Review Commissioner. And that statement is reference Perk 00084. And the statement was noted by an investigator, Stewart, on the 11th of May of 2015. Do you have that in the bundle before you too?
Yes.
And is that the copy of the statement that you provided to the Perk?
Yes, that's right.
So the statement is dated the 11th of May of 2015, just over a week after the incident that I'm going to ask you questions about. The statement that you gave to the inquiry, of course, was given nearly 7 years after the incident that brings us here today. And in fact, if we can return to your inquiry statement, please, and look at paragraph 15. Do we see that you have said, if there's any difference between this statement, that's your inquiry statement, and the statement I gave previously to Perk in 2015, the earlier statement should be preferred. My memory of the incident was much clearer at that time. Do we see that?
That's right, yes.
All right. So both of those statements, Mr. Ali, are in that black folder, and you can refer to them at any time as you give your evidence if you would find it helpful to do so.
Okay.
So I'm going to ask you to cast your mind back to the 3rd of May of 2015. And you've explained in your statements that you were a shopkeeper and you were on your way to your shop in Kirkcaldy at about 7:30, 7:45 in the morning. You've explained that your journey took you south along Henry Road, and that as you approached the mini roundabout with Hayfield Road, a car had stopped on the roundabout, and you also had to stop.
That's right.
What I would like to do, Mr. Ali, is show you some CCTV footage taken from a nearby pub called Gallagher's or the White Heather.
It's just on the roundabout.
Just
there,
on the
yeah.
roundabout. Can you picture it?
Yep, I know where it is.
We have some footage from a camera there. It's not of very high quality, but I'd like to ask you to watch a chapter of that footage to see whether we can identify your vehicle in it.
Yeah, sure.
Can you tell me what vehicle you were driving that day?
Well, as I said, at the time I would have known it would have been either a Mercedes, a red Mercedes, which I used to have, or a Vivaro that I have now. So it would be in the statement, or it'll be in the picture or in the thing.
Don't worry. Well, please help me with that. I'm not an expert on cars. The Mercedes, would that have been a car or a van?
No, it's a van. Mercedes
van.
is a van, a Vito van.
And it was red in colour, did you say?
That was red in colour, and obviously I changed it. After that, I've had the white Vauxhall Vito.
And is that also a van?
That's also a van, yeah.
So one way or another, it's a van that
It's
we're
a van
looking
that
out
I'm
for.
driving, yes, that's
So
right.
It might be red, it might be white, but it's
That's
a van
right.
that we're looking out
That's
for.
right.
Can we go to the evidence video timeline, please? And can we start, please, at about 7:21 and 30 seconds? And I'm going to ask you to play Miss Taylor-Smith just until I ask you to stop. So starting here would be perfect.
Control Bravo, one officer they punch you in the back
That's
of the
my
head.
van
Don't get
there.
serious
You can
injuries.
stop there, please. That's your van, Mr.
That's my
Ali.
van, and that's the car that was parked over there that I couldn't get past.
I see. What we'll do is just play on, I think, until your van is out of our field of view, and then go back to the beginning to try to establish some timings.
Secure on the ground. 30 seconds out, 4-1.
It's my fault if your line didn't give me an update, please.
If we can stop there, please, and go back to 7:21 and 30. Mr. Ali, I should perhaps have explained that you will hear in the background 999 calls, emergency airwaves and transmissions and so on. There's no need to have regard to those. It's simply the footage at the bottom of the screen that we're concerned with just now. So if we can perhaps watch again and see if we can capture the time at which your van first comes into view.
Control Bravo, one officer they punch you in the back of the head.
We
Don't get
stop
serious
there, please. So I saw the van come into the field of view at about 38 seconds past. There's a little time clock in the top left-hand corner.
Right, okay. Yeah.
And we see that at 7:21 and 41 seconds,
Yep, that's
you're
right.
right in the centre of the roundabout.
That's right, yeah.
Let's watch a little further and see if we can ascertain the time at which your van stops.
injuries. Male secure on the ground. 30 seconds out, 4.
We stop there, please. Did we see that you were travelling very, very slowly?
That's right.
And at about 48 seconds past the minute, you appear to have come to a stop behind the silver car that's parked in front of you.
That's right.
And again, if we can watch a little bit further, please.
What?
And if we stop there,
Yeah, it's just a matter of seconds.
it is, isn't it?
Yeah, it's not even a minute.
So we see that about 55 seconds past, you begin to manoeuvre around the parked car and you head on your way.
That's right.
So just to recap, we see that your van comes into our field of view, approaching the roundabout at about 38 seconds past the minute, and you begin, having slowed down, you begin to move off and manoeuvre your way around the little silver car at about 55 seconds past the minute. Would you agree with that?
Yes, I agree with that.
So your van was on the roundabout or just beyond the roundabout for a period of less than 20 seconds.
True.
All right, we may return to that, but we can put that to one side for now. And I'd like to ask you some questions about what you were able to see when you were stopped on or close to the roundabout. Am I right to understand that Hayfield Road would have been to your left as you drove through that roundabout?
Yes.
As you looked along Hayfield Road, would you have been looking out of your front windscreen or out of the passenger side of the car?
As I approached, it would be from the front, and then as I stopped, it would be from the side.
What could you see happening on Hayfield Road?
Well, as I approached, I noticed that there was an incident taking place, and there was 2 police officers that had pinned down someone, and also seen a woman police officer crossing the road towards the parked vehicles. There was a car and a van, a police car and a van there at the time.
Let me begin by asking you some questions about the person who you say was being pinned down. Could you see whether that was a man or a woman?
No, I couldn't really see whether it was a man or a woman, but obviously I presumed with it being the 2 officers that were pinning him down, it would have been a man. I couldn't really say.
Why did you make that assumption?
Obviously there was 2 police officers pinning him down. I didn't presume that it would have been a woman that they would be trying to pin down like that.
Can you describe the position that the person was lying in?
I think it would have been face down, and his face would be towards the houses and his feet towards the road.
I'm going to ask you some questions about the officers. You said that there were 2 police officers.
That's right.
Did you see whether they were male or female?
They were male.
The first of those officers, where was he in relation to the person on the ground?
Well, one was facing me, one that would be further away from me, and the one from to my side would be, his back would be towards me.
All right, so if I understand correctly, the person who was lying on the ground had their head towards the houses and their feet towards the road. And as you were looking at them, one officer was on the side of the person closest to you, and the other officer was on the side of the person furthest away from
That's
you.
right.
Do I understand
That's
correctly?
right.
And do I also understand correctly that both of the officers were facing the person who was on the road?
Yes.
And that would explain why the officer
No,
closest...
it was on the pavement.
On the pavement. I beg your pardon. And that would explain why the officer closest to you had his back
That's right.
to you. Let's call the officer who had his back to you the first officer. I'd like to ask you more about what he was doing. What position was he in?
Oh, I mean, he had his knee on the body, and obviously, and hands pinning him down. I think they had both his arms were folded onto the back like that, you know.
Whose arms were folded onto the back like that?
The person they were pinning down.
I see. So you've described this person lying, did you say he was lying face down?
Face down, yes.
With his arms being held behind his back. Do I understand correctly?
That's right.
And the officer who had his back to you, I wonder, in fact, could I ask you to perhaps come into the centre of the room and demonstrate the position that officer was in? That would be very helpful.
Yeah, sure.
Would you come forward, please, Mr. Ali? And I think there's a mark near the middle of the carpet. If you could place yourself about there. And the microphones may not pick you up, but if you could perhaps demonstrate the position.
The person that they're pinning down is facing this way. This
Okay.
is the pavement, on the pavement. And the officer's, obviously, I can't really bend with my knee in that, but he had his arm onto his back and his knee on his body, like that.
Thank you. I don't want you to be uncomfortable. If you perhaps come back to the microphone, I'll ask you more questions about that.
The other was facing the other way, similar.
And in a similar position.
Yeah, similar position, obviously facing towards me. The other one was facing that way.
I see. Please come back round. Thank you. In the demonstration that you gave, Mr. Ali, you got down onto your knees, and I think you explained that it wasn't very comfortable for you to get down onto your knees there.
No, I've had a knee replacement, so I can't really bend
see.
properly, so.
I'm sorry, if I had
Yeah.
known, I might not have asked. But should we understand that the officers were in the position that you adopted, or was
That's
their
right,
position
yes.
different
Similar
from that?
to, no, that position that I've shown, like one knee on the body and the other one holding his arm, with his hands.
So the position that you adopted there, you had one knee on the floor and the other knee at a sort of a right angle to your body?
No, only one of the, similar to that's right, just one knee onto the body, yeah.
So should we understand that the officers had one knee on the ground and
That's
one knee
right.
on the man's body? Have I understood that correctly?
Yeah.
Both officers were in the same position, facing each other,
That's right.
mirror opposites, effectively. So each had one knee on the ground and one knee on the body of the man. And help me to understand what they were doing with their arms. You mentioned the man's arms being behind his back.
I was just holding him down, that, as I said, it's only a matter of seconds that I was there, and that's basically all I seen, and then I drove off.
I appreciate that. It
Yeah.
was just a moment in time. I'm just
Yeah.
keen to understand as much as I can about what
Yeah.
you saw in that moment in time. What part of the man's body were the officers' hands or arms coming in contact with?
What part of the body of the man?
Of the man, or the person who was on the ground?
Well, just on his back.
On his back.
Yeah.
What was the person on the ground doing?
Just lying there.
Was the person moving or still?
No, as I said, I wasn't there that long that I could see any movement or anything. It was just being pinned down, and that was it.
Can I take you to your Perk Statement, please? To the second page of that statement.
Is that, which date is that? The 13th one or the other one?
This is the one from 2015,
Right,
from the
okay.
11th of May of 2015.
Right, okay.
The passages I'd like to refer to will come up on the screen. If we can scroll down a little more, please, Ms. Taylor-Smith. Perfect. Do we see that what is recorded in your Perk Statement is that you said, the two male officers were down on the ground when I first seen them. There was movement from the person on the ground, and they were definitely putting pressure on the person to keep the person on the ground. I couldn't see if the person was face up or face down. Do you see that?
Yes, I see that, yes.
You go on to say, one of the officers had his back to me facing the hospital and the other was facing me. The officer with his back to me was closer to me. Both officers were kneeling on the person. The officer facing me and furthest from me was kneeling down round about the head area of the person. I can't say definitely kneeling on the person's head, just towards the head area. The second officer with his back to me was kneeling towards the middle to the bottom of the person's body. Both officers were using their both hands to restrain the person as well as one of their knees. At the time I saw this, I thought at any time that the two male police officers were just restraining and arresting somebody. I wasn't shocked at what I seen, it was just an arrest. I got the impression that the person on the ground was trying to get up and the officers were using force to keep him down. Do you see that there?
Yes, I see that, yes.
And it will be what you told the Perk?
Yeah,
at
obviously the memory
time.
would have been fresher at that time, so...
So should the chair and the assessors, when considering your evidence, prefer the evidence that you've given today or the statement that you gave to the Perk in 2015?
I would prefer if that evidence on the 2015 would be used.
All right. Mr. Ali, you also said that there was a lady officer.
Mhm.
You said, I think, that you saw her cross the road towards the vehicles.
That's right.
In the footage that we looked at, there were vehicles on both sides of the road, so I want to understand what direction she was crossing from. As you were looking down Hayfield Road, did she cross from your right to your left or from your left to your right?
Well, from the side that the incident was happening to the other side, so if you're looking from my point of view, it would be to the left she would be crossing.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that. From the side that the incident was taking place?
It's to the opposite
to
side
the
of the
opposite
road.
side of the road.
Opposite side of the road. That's the vehicles were parked on the opposite side, the van and the car.
After you manoeuvred your way around the car that had stopped in front of you, did you go to your shop and carry on with your day?
Yes, that's right.
Bear with me just a moment, please, Mr. Ali. Can we return to the officers pinning the person down? You said that they had their hands on the man, on the person, and also their knees. Whereabout on the person were the officers putting their hands?
It would be holding his arms, I suppose. As I said, it's that long now.
You described his hands being behind his back.
That's right.
Where were their knees? Which part of his
Just
body?
on towards the back, the body, you know.
The back part of his body. Would the back part of his body be his back or the rear of his legs? What part of his body?
As I say, I can't say that much. Not now. I mean, it's not that fresh at the moment, you know. But it is definitely, obviously, they're pinning him down with the knee and that on his body, you know. But which part of the body, I couldn't say, you know.
All right. I have no further questions for you. Thank you for your time, Mr. Ali.
Thank you.
Are there any Rule 9 applications in respect of this witness? No. Mr. Akhtar, thank you very much for coming to give evidence to the inquiry. That's the end of your evidence. You're now free to go.
Thank you.
I think, in fact, the inquiry will adjourn for a short time in order to get the necessary arrangements in place to have Detective Constable Tomlinson back. No, Miss Graham.
Thank you. PC Tomlinson, when we were on image 6, I forgot to ask you something.
Okay. Well, that's
Can we immediately go back to that, and I'll just deal with it before I move on? We had in that image Mr. Bio positioned on the south side of Hayfield Road, and I didn't invite you to fine-tune that position. So can we look at that now, please? You'll see the hedge on the left, the pavement, the island on the right, and I think yesterday you'd given us the position of Mr. Bio when he landed on the ground.
Yeah.
Are you comfortable that that's a reasonable indication of the position, or would you like to move that?
I mean, all I remember it was flat, like so. What I mean by that is there was no difference in height. So if we're going to move Mr. Bio, it would either be onto the pavement or somewhere in that general area. I don't know exactly where, but I just know that there wouldn't have been a step up or step down in height. So all of Mr. Bio would have been either on the pavement or somewhere where the pavement was the same height as the road.
So either entirely on the pavement or entirely on the road?
Yeah, but I know it wasn't on the road, so it must be entirely on the pavement.
On the pavement. So subject to those caveats, are you content with that position? Or would you like to refine it or change it in any way?
Yeah, just that position, just move Mr. Bio so his feet aren't hanging off the pavement. Aye, that'll do.
Yeah. Comfortable that
Yeah.
that's... Thank you very much. Thank you for clarifying that. I'm
That's
sorry
fine.
I forgot to do that before lunch. Can I move on to use of force? So we're going to move away from the footage and the images now. And can I ask you, what do you remember about the training you received on use of force?
It would have been through officer safety training, but I couldn't specifically say.
Okay.
Like,
Do you
what it would be.
remember in what circumstances use of force is justified by a police officer?
When you arrest someone, you can use force. If a person's obviously compliant. I mean, the use of force, you kind of use that even the kind of the come along hold, which would be kind of guiding someone by the hand. It's a degree of force showing up. It's a degree of force. So, there's different levels of force in situations when you can use different levels of force as well.
And we may hear that it has to be reasonable, proportionate, and the minimum necessary.
Yeah.
Do you remember that from your
Yeah.
training? And what have you been told in officer safety training about baton strikes to the head?
We're obviously made aware in training that baton strikes to certain areas of the body, not specifically just the head, but carry a greater risk, and it's something to be aware of. It's not in training. It's not a case of you should never strike there, but it's a case of you must be aware. There's obviously a significant risk with some areas of the body.
And when you say a significant risk, if you're enforcing a blow to the head, are you made aware that there's the possibility of death or serious injury because of that?
Yeah.
And so you may only strike a blow to the head when the use of deadly force is justified.
Yes.
And I'd like to ask you to look briefly at a use of force SOP, a standard operating procedure. And we've heard that officers know about these and they're aware of them. This will come onto the screen. It's PS 10933. Well, maybe we won't. Don't worry about it. That's absolutely fine. I'm going to read out some levels. You've talked already about the different levels of force that can be used. So if you take it from me that the use of force SOP talks about something called the Confrontational Continuum. Do you remember anything about that?
I'm aware of it. I couldn't. I don't know
So
if the bottom say it.
I'm looking at paragraph 4.2, and it assists officers to determine what may be considered to be the appropriate level of force to be used in any eventuality, and should be used to assist officers to subsequently justify the extent of any force used. And there are In paragraph 4.6, profiling a person's behaviour may assist with determining the appropriate response, and behaviours are categorised as follows. And there are 6 levels of categorisation. There's compliance, level 1, level 2, verbal resistance and or gestures, level 3, passive resistance, level 4, active resistance, level 5, assaultive resistance, and level 6, serious or aggravated assaultive resistance. So this is the person's behaviour,
Yeah.
the way it's categorised. Do you recognise those levels and those terms that I've read
Yeah,
out?
I do, yes.
Yeah. So could you help us to understand the different types of behaviour that Mr. Bio exhibited in Hayfield Road? And I'd like you to help us understand how you categorised his behaviour. So when you used your spray,
Yep.
so you've talked about him being on the path and you using your spray. Can you tell us that the level of behaviour that he was demonstrating at that time?
Non-compliance.
Non-compliance.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's difficult because I can't obviously refer to it on the screen.
Yes, I'm sorry about that. So there's level 1 is compliance. It's not that.
So it's not that.
And level 2 is verbal resistance and or gestures. This includes shouting, swearing and verbal challenges to requests and or instructions given. It normally includes non-verbal gestures and posturing, body language, and can consist of warning and danger signs of potential attack. That's level 2. Level 3 is passive resistance. This is a typical tactic used, but not exclusively, by demonstrators. It is best described as non-active conduct with no compliance to lawful instruction.
Yeah, and that's what Mr. Bio demonstrated.
So that's level 3,
Yeah,
when you used your spray.
when I used my spray, yeah.
And then what category would you say of behaviour did he demonstrate when you used your baton?
The more serious one, so 0.6.
So level 6, serious aggravated assaultive resistance, the highest level of resistance encountered, which generally involves the intended use of weapons as part of the attack, where the perceived threat is that of serious injury or is life-threatening. It can also include situations without the presence of weapons, where the perceived threat is that of serious injury or is life-threatening. And so when you used your baton, that's the level of force, level of behaviour of Mr. Bio.
His actions towards PC Short were such that I thought it was going to kill her. Obviously, we've had reports of a knife as well, so there's a consideration that the weapon's still in play. And what I mean by that is it's unaccounted for at that time, so, yeah.
You've told us that at no time you saw him produce or brandish
No, but
the knife.
there's an opportunity to produce that from a concealed location on a person's body.
Yeah. Then when you, when PC Walker engaged him and brought him to the ground, and you both engaged in restraint of Mr. Bio, and you've described using your baton to his Achilles area, and you've described straddling his legs. What category of behaviour would you say he was demonstrating
That's
then?
active resistance. So I think, is it-
Active resistance. That's level 4.
Level 4, again, without them kind of being on the screen, it's kind of difficult for me to...
I'll read that out.
Please,
to
thank you.
This is more of a physical form of resistance in that the subject is actively doing something to prevent or obstruct an officer from carrying out their duty. This type of resistance, although physical by nature, falls short of an assault upon another. We've got another copy here. Here it is. So let's look at paragraph 4.6, please. And the different levels. We're looking at level 4 at the moment. You see, I was reading that active resistance, and this type of resistance, although physical by nature, falls short of an assault upon another. It can include holding on to an object, person, either physically or mechanically, struggling to break free from an officer's grasp, trying to dispose of evidence.
Yeah.
And that's when you were, as I've said, brought to the ground, baton to the Achilles and straddling his legs. And having categorised those levels of behaviour, I'd like to go through what the appropriate officer use of force option was. So if we can go down the page, please, we'll see at paragraph 4.7, there's a list of officer use of force options. So this is officer's reasonable response, force options. And you'll see there 472, level 1, officer presence. And this is a broad term encompassing the physical and psychological aspects of an officer, especially in uniform or other specialist equipment, having a visual impact and effect on the mind or will of another, merely by attending to or arriving at the situation. Adopting a professional approach and conduct can enhance this.
Yes.
And then level 2, tactical communications. And you've talked to us yesterday about communications. And this is the ability to give out and take in information. And then level 3 is control skills. The lowest level of physical use of force, where there is some form of restraint applied to an offender. And it may be as little as placing a hand on an offender or applying hold and restraint techniques, handcuffing techniques and use of leg restraints.
Yep.
And you talked a moment ago about just holding your hand, touching someone and directing them.
Yep.
And that's level 3. And then level 4, defensive tactics. These tactics are generally perceived to be strikes, whether delivered by means of empty hand techniques or baton strikes, but also includes more robust defensive handcuffing and use of CS spray.
Yep.
And then level 5 is deadly or lethal force. And this is a level of force that has the potential to cause serious injury or even death when it is applied. It may, in certain circumstances, where there is a serious risk of severe injury or life-threatening risk, be a deliberate choice of option, but in all circumstances must be proportionate to the perceived threat and degree of imminent danger. If this is the chosen option, there must be high degree of jeopardy involved, i.e. the subject has the means, ability, opportunity, and is displaying intent to cause serious injury or kill. All elements of jeopardy must be present immediately at the time that lethal force is applied. Officers using empty hand strikes, baton strikes, as well as authorised firearms officers' use of conventional firearms could potentially deliver lethal force. And you recognise that description?
I do, yes.
So I'd like to go through with you what level of force, how you would categorise your use of force in Hayfield Road. So first of all, when you used your spray.
Yeah. So if you go
would
up,
you want to go
yeah, please,
up the page again, please? And we read out specific reference to spray.
So
I think could you go down again,
I
please?
go down a bit. Sorry. So you can see it there on level 4.
Level 4.
Yeah.
And when you drew your baton, and
Well, initially the draw of the baton would have been a defensive technique because I perceived that I was going to be attacked. So the initial draw of the baton was level 4 defensive.
and then the strikes with the baton.
When I perceived that PC Short was about to be killed, it was level 5 because I was under the genuine belief that he had or was in the process of killing PC Short. And
then when you were on the ground, involved in the restraint with PC Walker?
It would have been a combination of level 4 and level 3. I say level 4 because my fear was that he was going to still potentially use his legs to manoeuvre out of the restraint. And obviously it's defensive as well as an attempt to control. It wasn't used to cause injury, but merely pen compliance. And by that, what I mean is I'd already viewed and witnessed Mr. Bio using his legs as effectively weapons, and I didn't want to be in a position where I was on the floor. So the blow would have been a combination of 4 and 3.
Thank you. And do you consider that you used the appropriate use of force option at all times in Hayfield Road?
I do.
And do you consider that the situation you've described yesterday and today was one where the use of deadly force was justified?
I do.
And I think you've already explained why that is the case. And thank you. I'll leave that SOP to one side now. Can I ask you if you remember the recovery of a knife before you left the scene that day at Hayfield Road?
The first time I've ever seen a knife is during the public inquiry. I had an awareness that there was some interest in a patch of grass. I don't know if you're able to bring a map up and I can kind of point to it, but certainly it was a patch of grass towards which Mr. Bile was walking back towards. Obviously at the time I wouldn't have known that he was walking back towards the knife, but obviously having seen the pictures at the inquiry, that's the first time I've physically seen the knife.
Well, it may be that we can show one of the images from the 3D reconstruction scene, which will show that. We'll have that in a moment. Could I ask you, first of all, though, to look at Perk 263? That's your statement that you gave to Perk in June 2015, and it's page 5 of that statement. And it's paragraph 7, so it's the final paragraph on that page. And it says, with regards to a knife being found. Do you see that paragraph?
I do, yes.
When I was searching for a knife on the man, James McDonough ran towards the grass area where the man had been walking towards and pointed to the ground. I didn't know what he was doing, but I saw Chuck D.C. Connell move to the same area with a brown paper bag. I didn't see him pick anything up and never paid any attention to it after that. And I wonder if we could see one of the images on the screen.
What I would say as well, I think where it says I saw Chuck, I think that should say Chunk.
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 Is that his nickname?
I believe so. I don't really know who DC Connell is. I just know or think Chunk is DC Connell.
All right.
I could be mistaken, but certainly Chuck is a typo. It should be Chunk.
All right. So it's a typo. Thank
Yeah.
you. And now we have Mr. De Giovanni here. I'm wondering if image 3 might be the best. Yeah. Oh, let's not use the stills then. Let's use the live. And Mr. De Giovanni will take control of the situation. So we're back, you'll see, in the 3D reconstruction.
Yeah.
And this is actually one of the scenes where you've placed characters.
Yeah.
And you see again on the left-hand side, we can see the markings on the road that would show the roundabout
Yeah.
at Henry Road and Hayfield Road.
Aye.
And then if we zoom in, we can probably see the position. Now, if I remember rightly, there was a paper clip or such like at one point. Right, so if we could look into the sort of where the roundabout is. Thank you. So on the left of the screen, we can see the roundabout at Hayfield Road and Henry Road. And then at the top of the screen, there's what appears to be a lamppost in front of the trees nearer to the road, and there is a red circle with an exclamation.
Yeah.
And can we look at that more closely, please? And we may hear evidence at some point in the hearing that that is the area where a knife was found.
Yeah.
And is that the area where you saw Chunk or DC Connell?
Yeah. Aye, it was just that generalised area. I just remember it being the grass.
But if we could pan out, please. So when you talk about Mr. Bio going towards the area, on this image, you'll see that the area where you had placed Mr. Bio near the trees
Yeah.
is over to the far right of that image. Now, you're not suggesting that he threw the knife or he disposed of the knife?
I couldn't say how. Like,
you didn't see anything?
No, I didn't
like
see that. So, but in a generalised walking direction, that was back towards the location of the knife.
So Mr. Bio was on the path walking towards the direction of the roundabout,
Roundabout the
effectively,
area,
or
yeah.
Henry Road, and the area that we see with the red circle is where the knife was located. Thank you. Thank you very much. We can remove that from the screen. Now, before you left the scene, we briefly touched on the arrival of the ambulance, and I think I'd referred you to page 5 of your statement to Perk, paragraph 6, which was just above the one we looked at a moment ago. And within that statement, when you're talking about the ambulance arriving, it says, a stretcher appeared and I helped the man onto it, face up, helped by Alan Smith, Craig Walker and Alan Payton. We put him onto a stretcher on his back, still handcuffed to the front and one fast strap to his lower knee. Now, by this stage, I think you've already told us that he's unconscious, and that's what prompted the ambulance being called. He's not been breathing and CPR's been performed. Can I ask you why, when he was put onto the stretcher and taken to the ambulance, his handcuffs and the fast strap weren't removed?
I don't actually remember putting him on, or helping to assist put on the stretcher. What I can remember is Alan, PC Alan Smith driving the ambulance. But I wouldn't necessarily remove handcuffs or fast strap, because the time taken to do that would obviously be time taken away from the paramedics trying to do their work. And to my awareness, it wasn't actually interfering with their work. But obviously I can't speak to that. So.
Well, we may hear from the paramedics about that. How long would it normally take to remove handcuffs? I know you've told us previously they weren't your handcuffs.
Yeah. So, it's as long as it takes to get a key, which the keys are obviously kept on our person. As an example, there's my key, but it's a small key. So then you've got to unclip that key, because that lanyard can get interfered with the handcuffs.
Are the keys generic, or do they?
The keys are generic, yes. So anybody can produce a key. There's different styles. You can get larger keys, smaller keys, but it generally would be the time taken to produce a key, and then you've got to, depending on which way the handcuffs have been applied, and by that what I mean is, on one side of the handcuff there is no hole. On the other side of the handcuff there's a hole for the key to go into. So depending on if that hole's facing away or to the body, also then may increase the time taken to find the holes, locate the holes. You've got to turn the key one way. When you lock a set of handcuffs, there's a safety mechanism that stops them ratcheting further on and getting tighter. You double lock them, so you push a little bar in on the top. Now, to overcome that double lock mechanism, to undo the handcuffs, you've got to turn the key one way and then the other way, and then you've got to unloop. So that all takes time, and you wouldn't unloop just one, because if a person regains consciousness, that becomes a weapon. You've got a hand in a handcuff, which potentially I've been made aware that officers have succumbed, not succumbed, but have sustained injuries when a hand flailing around with a single cuff on could be used basically to strike an officer. So you're talking the amount of time to find a key, to overcome the double lock, to undo the handcuff, and then repeat that same process on the opposite side. So that we're talking quite a number of seconds.
And how long does it take for fast tracks to come off? Straps, sorry.
Again, it just depends, like, how tangled up they are. You might have wrapped them around a couple of times. So again, it's a case of trying to undo them, trying to untangle them if they've maybe been twisted around at the top. So again, you're talking seconds, which those seconds could be better spent performing CPR rather than trying to do something that's maybe not interfering with that.
Thank you. Can I ask you about your return to Kirkcaldy Police Office? So let's go back to your inquiry statement, please. And you've given us information about this part of the events that day at paragraphs 55 to 69. So that's over 3 pages. And when did you get back to Kirkcaldy Police Office?
I don't know what time it was that I got back. I just remember kind of being given a set of keys, and I think I'm the one that drove back. I think I was with PC Gibson. I don't know where in the the yard. And when I say yard, I mean like the car park area at the back of the station. I don't know where I would have parked or how long it would have taken me to get back. So it would have been the morning still, but I don't know what time.
How long does it normally take to get from Hayfield Road to Kirkcaldy Police Station?
Maybe 5-10 minutes, something like that. Maybe, I don't know. Maybe a bit less time, depending on traffic.
Who was in charge when you got back to the station?
I don't really know, to be honest, because obviously Sergeant Maxwell was still at the locus. Obviously he was the shift sergeant that day, so I don't know.
Okay. I'd like to ask you if you saw any senior officers that morning. Can I ask you, did you see Inspector Kay at any time?
I don't even know if Inspector Kay was at Kirkcaldy.
Okay.
I don't remember seeing him.
You don't remember seeing him
No, I don't remember seeing him,
all?
no.
Do you remember seeing Conrad Trickett, Chief Inspector, I think?
See, I remember being in Conrad Trickett's presence, and the only reason I remember it is because the name's unusual. It's just a name that's always stuck with me, Conrad and Trickett. One, I'd never met anyone called Conrad, and I just thought the surname Trickett was unusual, so that is a name that stuck with me. It's a name that I'm aware that obviously I've came into contact with that day, and I know he was sitting in the canteen with us, but I don't know what conversations I had with him.
Okay. Do you remember when you saw him?
It wasn't like he wasn't sitting there waiting for us. I don't know when he appeared, when he arrived. I just remember him being in the canteen at some point. I don't know who introduced him or if he introduced himself. I don't know. You know, the canteen, you can come in two doors, and again, I don't know which door he came from or, you know, who would have shown him. He's not a name that I would recognise around the station, so I recognise him as somebody from out west of Kirkcaldy.
Do you remember if Conrad Trickett gave you any advice not to confer with other officers about what had happened at Hayfield Road?
No.
Okay. And did you see any other senior officers such as Pat Campbell?
No, I don't even know who Pat Campbell is.
So you don't remember if a senior officer came in and gave you advice about not conferring or about your status or about giving statements?
No.
And did you remain in the canteen that day?
So initially when we arrived, we went back to the writing room, but then got directed down to the canteen.
Mm-hmm. Who was in the writing room?
I don't know. I want to say Scott Maxwell, Sergeant Maxwell was there.
So he was there when you went to the writing room?
I don't know if he was initially there though.
Right. Who was there when you got to the writing room?
I don't know. I remember Scott Maxwell couldn't have been there when I arrived because he was still at the locus. But who I remember in the writing room is Scott Maxwell. So I don't know for how long I was in the writing room until Scott Maxwell appeared. And I think PC Gibson was there. So Daniel Gibson.
Right. And how were you feeling at that time when you got back?
Pretty shit.
Do you remember having a conversation with Walker and Peyton?
No.
No. Do you want to say any more about how you were feeling?
Just that. I was probably glad I'd survived, I suppose. I didn't think that I would have got back, so.
Okay. Did you leave the canteen? You've said in paragraph 61 of your statement that you recall leaving the canteen once to retrieve a sleeve of polystyrene cups,
Yeah.
but you don't remember much about it.
I just remember we were in the canteen, and the canteen, to say it's a canteen, it's not. It's a room where I suppose you could call it a dining table. It's not really a dining table, it's just tables pushed together where you would sit and eat your lunch. And I remember there being no cups to either drink water, tea, coffee, and the only place I knew there was cups in the station was the custody area. So I went and got cups from the custody area, basically, so that we could at least drink something.
Did you speak to other police officers either en route to the custody area or during your time there?
I don't think so.
Do you have much of a recollection of the events?
No.
Can I ask you about your equipment and clothing? You mentioned this at paragraph 70 to 73. And actually, can I go back for a moment and just ask you to look at the previous page? I think at paragraph 67 you talk about PC Short. So we've heard that she returned to the canteen after being to the hospital that day.
Yeah.
Do you remember what time she came back?
No. Again, it just felt like forever. I don't know when she came back or how long I'd been sitting in the canteen.
Right. And then I think in your statement, paragraph 67, you say, I recall explaining that Mr. Bio had stamped on her back and that I had tried to protect her by striking him with my police-issue baton. And so you've addressed that there. Can we then turn on to the recovery of the equipment on the following page from paragraph 70 to 73? And you talk about putting your, paragraph 71, on my return to Kirkcaldy Police Station, I removed my police body armour and utility belt and placed it on the carpeted floor near to a locker room located at Kirkcaldy Police Station. This would have been an area I always use as a way of dekitting whilst within the police station. The body armour and belt would have been propped against the wall to avoid other officers falling over my equipment. Is this in the canteen?
No, sorry. So, to kind of describe it, you go in the rear of the police station, which is where like the operational office is going in and out of, rather than the front door. You go up a set of stairs, and then presented to you as a carpeted corridor, off which is the writing room and the vest room, and various other like offices and toilets. I dekitted myself in that carpeted corridor leading to the writing room and propped it up against the side. And the reason for that is that carpeted corridor can sometimes become like almost a runway when officers are leaving the station, and I didn't want anybody to go to a call and then trip over it and fall.
Was there any instruction given to you about the preserving your equipment or your uniform or any
No.
of those items? No. And is that where you normally left things when you
Yeah.
dekitted?
Yeah, or wherever I would. If I was in the canteen, I wouldn't go up there and dekit. I would dekit in the canteen, because if I had a call, you have to leave the station. Well, you don't have to, but the quickest way would be to leave the station, out the back, and then in another door to the canteen. Otherwise, it's down a series of corridors, and it's just an old building that's probably not fit for a modern layout.
We've heard other evidence about items being left in the canteen, lying about on the floor.
Yeah.
Did you see other items of equipment from other officers in the canteen?
I think at one point I probably would have taken my body armour down there as well, and it would have just been a case that, for me, the common practice was always there's a set of like coat hooks on the wall where traditionally you would probably hang your tunic if you wore a tunic, but latterly it's where you would hang your belts or your hat, or like a high visibility jacket. But that day all I can remember is just like body armour stacked up against the side, and I don't know what about the belts.
And that was in the canteen?
Yeah.
So things were stacked up on the floor?
Stacked up, yeah. but out of the way, like
Yeah.
against the wall, and again for the same reason, in that if someone's going to run through the canteen, because it is again another what I would class as a runway out to the backyard.
Do you remember people coming in and out of the canteen that day?
There was a couple of folk that came in without being made aware that obviously something had happened, and like folk arriving at their work had kind of came in and mistakenly found themselves in the canteen and then swiftly left, but never said anything. But I don't know, I couldn't say who came and went in that space of time.
Thank you. And then can I ask you to look at paragraph 74, so that's the next page. And you were asked by the inquiry team to look at the statement you'd given to Perk, and you say, I do not recall how I became aware of the mark to the rear of PC Nicole Short's body armour, other than it was a dirty mark that was clearly out of place and foreign to the normal appearance of the item of clothing. So I want to ask you about this mark.
Yeah.
Do you remember what time it was when you saw it?
It was still like daytime, because we were sat in the canteen all day, and I think it was maybe even dark when we left, but it was still daytime, and it was after PC Short had came back. I don't know how long she'd been with us in the canteen, but as she was taking her vest off to put it to one side, I just remember looking and being like, I don't think she'd seen it, and I said, what's that? And pointed out, and my initial thought was it looked like a footprint or the shape of a footprint on the back of the body armour.
And I wonder if you could look at a vest for me, please. And do we? No. The actual vest. Sorry. And just point out on the actual vest where you saw the mark.
Cheers.
Thank you.
So it was somewhere in this kind of region,
Right.
below the word police, but like
in the panel immediately beneath the
so
police,
like, it's not as low as this, but like somewhere like
Alright.
here.
above the horizontal band of silver material that's just immediately below the police
Yeah,
badge.
because the way I remember it, obviously it looked like mud or dirt or something, but I don't know if the mud or dirt would have stuck to these bits. Like looking back now on it, that's why I just remember it being out of place.
So you remember it being on the yellow part
Yeah.
of the vest?
Aye, and normally they're quite clean like that.
Yeah.
And if it gets ripped or that, you would tend
You
to
could
replace them.
Thank you. And can I ask you about your status and what you knew about your status? Now, when I use the word status, I'm talking about as a witness or as a suspect.
Yeah.
Now, you mention this at paragraph 75 of your inquiry statement. And you said you don't remember exact conversations. And then at 76, you say you didn't receive any advice regarding my status at the time of the incident, and it was only later. And then 78, you say no advice was, I do not recall what advice or instructions I received on my return to the police station other than being told not to leave the canteen.
Yeah.
I do recall other senior officers being around, but do not recall whom other than Conrad Trickett and Amanda Given. Now, we've heard she's a SPF representative.
Yeah, I don't know what rank she is.
I was aware of being spoken to, but due to my state of mind at the time, I did not retain these conversations. And was your state of mind as you've described for us already?
Aye, I mean, another way of describing it would be, I just felt like a burst spring. Like, if you can imagine a spring in your head, I just felt like it was everywhere.
Okay. You say there that you were told not to leave the canteen. Do you remember who told you not to leave the canteen?
No,
And were you told to do that before you went to get cups?
I can't remember when. I think if I was probably told that, I wouldn't have left the canteen to get cups. I probably would have just said to somebody else to get them.
Yeah. So normally you would comply with that type of instruction. And can I ask you, you've said you didn't get advice or instructions, but what would you have expected or what would you have wanted at that stage?
I don't know what I would have expected. I don't know. I've never obviously been involved in something like that, and my expectation was that somebody would know what to do. But like, obviously, I didn't know what the process was, so I don't know what my expectation was, other than that somebody would come in and have a clear like plan. I don't know.
But you didn't get that during that day?
No.
And then can I ask you, do you remember at some stage a suggestion about a welfare meeting at Kirkcaldy Police Office, not necessarily on the 3rd, but being arranged by an Inspector Seath?
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you remember when that was going to be?
It was sometime like, it wasn't that day, and I don't think it was the day after.
Right.
Because the reason I say that is because I came into work and then I got signed off sick.
How long were you signed off sick?
Around about a month.
Okay.
So that immediate day after, there was an expectation we would simply return to work and carry on with paperwork.
Okay. Can I ask you if you met with a DCI Keith Hardy and a DI Stuart Wilson from the MIT or the MIT team, Major Incident Team, on the 7th of May 2015? Would that sound about right?
That would probably sound about right. I can't now remember the names, but if I've said them in my original statement, that would be because I'd obviously be fresh in my mind, but I don't...
This is information I've been given. And then were you informed by them of your status as a witness?
No.
No, you don't remember being informed of that?
No,
Or you weren't informed of that?
I don't remember being informed of that, or... Like, I was aware that it was now being run by the Perk, so my confusion as to why the MIT team from Police Scotland would be involved was... I couldn't figure that out, but certainly my status, I didn't think it would be coming from Police Scotland. I thought it would come from Perk.
And were you asked by those officers to provide a statement that day?
I was, yeah.
Yeah. And you refused to provide that statement?
I mean, I wouldn't say refused. I was advised not to by my solicitor, and the statement I provided to them was such that, based on my legal representative advice, that I wouldn't be providing a statement until my status was clarified.
So that was advice you'd received from your solicitor at that time? And is it possible that there's some confusion maybe about the context in your mind in which those officers, the MIT officers, were being were there and making the requests from you? Were you maybe perhaps confused about what they were trying to do that day?
Again, I was still off sick, and I was still, like, my head was all over the shop, but it was never, for me, I don't recall it ever being made very clear.
Right.
I had the expectation that I was going in for a welfare point of view, and that never happened.
So maybe some confusion there about what you expected and what they were expecting. Thank you. Can I ask you about paperwork? You've helped us in your statement from paragraph 80 onwards. You've talked about, first of all, let's look at paragraph 82 in relation to Amanda Given. And you've said that your status wasn't officially clarified until some days later. I acted on the advice of the Scottish Police Federation rep, Amanda Given, that I had the right to delay in the providing of a statement until such time as it was received in writing.
Yeah.
So you were expecting that status to be confirmed in writing to
Yeah,
you?
and I think that advice probably, maybe Amanda Given was like the middle person, but that advice was coming from my solicitor.
When you say the middle person, what do you
So she was the the point of contact so that I could.
Right. So intermediate time.
Yeah, aye,
Middle.
because of how we all were. She helped us, like, with the welfare point of view, and I think it was so that we could kind of get the correct advice.
Okay. And then in paragraph 83, you say, I followed the advice provided by the Scottish Police Federation and sought legal advice, as it was my right to do so. In any event, I was not in a fit state of mind to complete relevant paperwork, having just been involved in the incident. I was emotional and unable to clearly focus. This was not just the case for the hours immediately following the incident, but also the days that followed. And can I ask you, after you regained your equilibrium, did you complete the paperwork at that stage?
I was still off sick
And you were off sick for how long?
for a month, and then I got transferred stations.
Right, so you didn't ever go back to Kirkcaldy Police Office? Right. And having been transferred, did you complete any paperwork?
No.
No.
And that was again on legal advice.
On the basis of your legal
Yeah.
advice. So in relation to paragraph 84, please, you say that due to the passage of time, I cannot accurately recall the details of conversations had with other officers. I took advice from the Scottish Police Federation representative, Amanda Given, to seek legal advice before filling in such paperwork, with a view to clarifying my status as a witness or a suspect. As I understand it, Police Scotland was not in a position to make this decision, and this was a decision for Perk following an investigation. So your understanding at the time was that Perk would decide if you were a witness or a suspect?
Yeah, because they were in charge of the...
They were in charge of the
Yeah.
investigation, and you were anticipating that that would be shared with you in writing
Yeah,
before you would have that position clarified.
yeah,
So if people did tell you or say to you, you're a witness, that wasn't what you were expecting, you wanted it written
I wanted
down.
it in writing, yeah.
Thank you. Can I ask you about your Perk Statement, please, 263? And I'd like to look at page 6, please, paragraph 8 or 9. So this is the bottom half of the page.
Yep.
Paragraph 8 starts, I still had my leg restraints and CS spray. That's on the screen. And we can see that there. And you've said about 5 lines down, during this time Nicole arrived. Do you see that?
Yeah.
Back from hospital about 11 a.m. She still had all her kit on. She took off her body armour and put it down beside my kit in the canteen. Amanda Given arrived as she went with Scott Maxwell to get everyone a KFC meal. Amanda and Scott came back, and Chief Inspector Conrad Trickett came in to speak with us in the presence of the Federation representatives about post-incident procedures. He was there all day and didn't say anything to us about conferring, etc. But we watched TV and played pool mostly. After the KFC, I asked Amanda Given if I should fill in my notebook. She said not to, and I asked her if I needed a solicitor, and she said yes, because by that time the man had died and we would need legal advice. She said that it was a death in custody and the Perk would investigate. She told us not to give statements to the police. If anyone approached us to ask for statements, we had to refuse and seek legal advice. Amanda also told us not to fill in a use of force or CS spray form, because that would have outlined our actions without speaking to a solicitor first. So was this your, obviously you've told us already, this is a fresher recollection to the events when you gave this statement to Perk, rather than your evidence now. So again, should the Chair prefer this paragraph than the evidence you've given us today?
Yeah.
So looking at that now, do you have any recollection of receiving that advice from Constable Given, or?
I just remember asking what I should be doing, and she said to seek legal advice before I did anything.
Right.
So by that, I took it that not to fill in things.
All right, so when you said, I asked Amanda Given if I should fill in my notebook. She said not to.
Yeah.
That sounds like you saying to Amanda Given, should I fill in my notebook? And she says not to.
And until I've spoke to
Right.
somebody. So like I wasn't actually sure what I should be doing. As I said, like the shock of what had just happened, and then I hadn't the slightest clue what the procedure was afterwards. So I'd asked and I was told no, go and seek legal advice.
So she tells you not to complete the paperwork and to seek legal advice.
Yeah.
Thank you. Do you recollect that now?
Yeah.
Thank you. I'd like to move on to ask you some questions about race, please.
Yeah.
You've obviously, in your inquiry statement, given a lot of answers that touch on the subject. I'd just like to ask you some additional questions, if I may. You mentioned yesterday about attending previous knife incidents, and I wondered, did any of them involve black men?
I wouldn't be able to, again, it would be a guess,
Okay.
but I wouldn't be able to say for certain.
I'm not going to ask you to guess. Had you had training, equality and diversity training on race?
Yeah,
prior
that would
to
have
May
been
2015?
when I was a probationer at the Scottish Police College. Like the initial part of your training is dedicated in and around sort of race and sort of diversity awareness.
And how much time did you spend on that during your training course?
It was 1 or 2 weeks. It was quite. I remember it being quite lengthy. It wasn't just like one session. It was numerous sessions, but I couldn't like say how many.
No, that's fine. We understand you were up to date with your training in May 2015.
Yeah.
Do you ever take someone's physical characteristics or skin colour or religion and make any assumptions about them, such as a black person is a terrorist?
No.
No. Can I ask you what, if anything, you learned during your training about unconscious bias?
It would have been in that initial phase. I can't say exactly what the input would have been, but I'm aware that there was obviously sessions around unconscious bias.
And were you personally able to identify any areas of unconscious bias in your own mind during that training?
No.
Were you asked to do that?
I think I was asked to do that, but
You weren't able to identify any? And of the training that you received, how did you implement any learning points or education that you obtained from that into your day-to-day work?
just to be mindful. And I think one of the, that people do come from different backgrounds, and one of the things is if you're uncertain about how to approach a situation, ask. There's no. I was always under the impression there's no problem with asking somebody to take the time to maybe explain that if that's a gap in your knowledge, and it actually shows that you're seeking to do the right thing by the person as well.
Okay. And had you, before May 2015, had you ever come across any situations or examples of racial discrimination in Kirkcaldy Police Office?
No.
Any racist jokes or comments?
No.
If you had come across situations like that in Kirkcaldy, how would you have responded to them?
I would have challenged it.
And when you say, what do you mean?
What I mean is, if someone uses kind of inappropriate language, you would pull them to one side and say that's not on, and explain the reasons why. But I wouldn't let something like that lie.
Okay. And what was your impression of senior officers at the time? Is that how they would have responded if they'd heard anything like that?
Yeah.
And had any of your colleagues exhibited any behaviour of that sort, racist discrimination or?
No.
No. At the time in May 2015, what awareness, if any, did you have about public concern about the use of force by police officers, particularly against black men?
I don't know if it was maybe necessarily in and around that time, but I'm certainly aware, obviously, it's reported on quite heavily from America. But Aye, I've got an awareness of that from obviously from the news and
So
that.
you keep up to date with that
Yeah,
on the
with
news?
that aspect, aye.
And from your own experience in Kirkcaldy, you've told us you'd been there for around 18 months by May 2015. To what extent was that a concern for Police Scotland or in the Kirkcaldy area?
I don't think it was a concern. It's certainly not one that I was aware of.
Okay. And at that time, were you aware of high-profile cases in other parts of the UK, such as in down south, where a person has died in police custody, having been restrained, or being restrained face down, and public concern and debate about that?
If it was reported on the news, probably at the time, I can't now sit here and say I remember. But certainly, if it was something that was on the news, it probably would have been something I'd read.
All right. Thinking back to 2015 and the training you'd had up till that point, was there much information sharing about, say, learning points from down south and other cases with officers in Police Scotland?
I don't know, we don't get stuff gets obviously shown in our electronic briefing system or when we go to OST, but we never get told necessarily where it's came from. It would be some maybe information that's provided to us and kind of brought to our attention, but we would never necessarily get told, and this has came from, as an example, Greater Manchester or kind of Wales Police System. We would never get told specifically where.
So the source wouldn't be identified?
No, but it would filter its way down. There would be things that we would get told.
Did you recognise any from cases that you'd heard about on the news? Any examples that you were given?
No.
Can I ask you, in May 2015, what was your awareness of the black community in Kirkcaldy?
Don't know.
Do you not remember?
No.
Or you don't remember having an awareness?
I don't remember having, I'm not saying I didn't have an awareness, but I don't know what,
Had you been involved in any community relation work with the black community
No.
in around Kirkcaldy? No. Had any of your fellow officers been engaged in that sort of work, as far as you know?
I don't know.
What experience did you have of the black community, either as witnesses, as suspects, or as victims of crime?
It would just be through my normal sort of daily engagements with members of the community.
So how often would you come into contact with members of the black community?
I don't know. I wouldn't be able to put a figure on it. Again, it would be just a guess.
All right. Okay. So did you have much experience prior to May 2015 of interacting with any members of the black community in Kirkcaldy?
Again, I can't put a number on it, but I would have interacted with the community as a whole through my kind of duties as a police officer. So I would have interacted with all members of the community, but I couldn't put a number on it.
Were you aware at that time of any tensions between the black community and the police force?
In Kirkcaldy?
In Kirkcaldy?
No.
I'd like to ask you some questions about stereotypes. What sort of stereotypes are you aware of about black people generally, or black men specifically, in the context of criminal justice?
In what sort of?
Are you aware that black men may be perceived as more likely to resist, or less compliant, or be more likely to be violent, or to have superhuman strength or size?
That's not something that I would ever, that's, for me personally, I would never hold that opinion or thought.
Okay. Are you aware of those sorts of stereotypes
I am obviously
existing?
aware of those stereotypes existing, and then again, that is through sort of the media and how that media reports, and obviously through training, but that's not views that I would ever hold.
They're not views you
No.
hold. Yesterday you used the word swagger when you were trying to find a way to describe the manner in which
Yeah.
Mr. Byle walked towards and along the path. And I'm wondering whether you consider that use, that word swagger, as exhibiting any type of underlying bias.
No, because it described the kind of walk. It wouldn't necessarily. I don't know how else to describe that walk. You know what I mean? I would struggle otherwise for kind of words for that.
Would you use that word in relation to a white man?
Yeah. Because for example, I would say that Mick Jagger, like, would swag around on the stage. Like, that is kind of a word that I would use to describe that kind of like that kind of style of walking. You know, like an exaggerated style of walking, like a swagger.
Thank you. We've heard some evidence that at one point Mr. Bye was described as being the size of a house. Is that the sort of view that you held?
Until I actually heard the phrase "the size of a house," like, it's not a phrase that I would use. And if somebody asked me what the size of a house meant, I would think it would mean someone that's fat.
All right. Okay. Was it possible in May 2015 that any of those assumptions or stereotypes influenced you and your perception of the events
No.
as they occurred in Hayfield Road?
No.
So if you'd arrived at Hayfield Road in May 2015 and it had been a white man who was 5'10" and 12 stone 10 pounds, and there had been calls from the public about someone with a knife, but you couldn't see that knife, and you're there with other officers who have equipment, what would your first level have been in terms of communicating with that person?
Again, it would be exactly the same as how I've described with Mr. Boyle. So a person's race or perceived race wouldn't affect my decision-making process, and it wouldn't have changed. You know.
And if you'd been first on the scene, what would you have done?
What do you mean, sorry?
If you'd arrived first on the scene,
Yeah.
and Mr. Byle had been standing in Hayfield Road, and there's no knife visible, and his behaviour is not, he's not shouting, he's not brandishing a weapon,
Yeah.
and perhaps he's ignoring you.
Mm.
What would you have done initially?
Again, I mean, I don't know how I can kind of answer that because it's hypothetical. But again, started off with trying to use TACCOMs, communication, speaking.
And
Yeah.
that was examples you gave of that yesterday
Yeah.
when you were giving your evidence. If that person had been non-compliant and ignored the commands, would you have immediately moved to your CS spray or your PAVA spray?
Again, I don't know how I can like it's kind of hypothetical again. Do you know the situation played out as it did? But I.
Do you think if Mr. Byle had been white, you would have made greater attempts to communicate with him than you did?
I think I made sufficient attempts to communicate, and again, race or perceived race wouldn't ever influence that. I would try as best as possible in every circumstance.
So do you think if he'd been white, it would have altered the use of your spray or the use of your baton or any of the other actions that you took?
No.
If he'd been white, would you have been more likely to place greater reliance on assessing whether he was maybe suffering from a mental health crisis or he was under the influence of drink or drugs?
Again, like, race or perceived race doesn't come into it, so no. Again, to go in there and focus on specifically something would be then to put blinkers on for something else, and you could potentially miss things by doing that. So no, I would always go in there with an open mind. I would never make any judgments.
If he'd been white, do you think you would have called for an ambulance sooner?
No.
Can you give me 1 second,
Yeah.
please? There's one thing I haven't asked you, and I'm grateful to my learned junior for reminding me. The chair and the assessors may hear evidence that Mr. Bio didn't stomp on Nicole Short when she was on the ground. Is there any comment you would like to make about that?
I can only tell you what I saw, and that's what I saw.
Well, subject to any issues that you or the assessors may wish me to explore further in any more detail, then I have no further questions at this time.
Thank you, Ms. Graham. Do any legal representatives, with the exception of Mr. Jackson, have any applications under Rule 9? Just Ms. Mitchell, thank you. Detective Constable, would you withdraw from the room while I hear a submission, please? Now, Ms. Mitchell, if you'd come to the table, please. Excuse me. Yes, Ms. Mitchell.
I'm obliged, my learned friend counsel to the inquiry has incorporated within our questioning a lot of questions or the Section 9 applications that we made. So these are additional and follow-up questions to questions that have already been asked. The first question I would like to ask is in relation to evidence that the officer gave in relation to the training around unconscious bias. He was asked if he was personally able to identify any areas of unconscious bias during that training, and his answer was no. And what I would like to ask the officer is if he can remember how that was done, how he interrogated himself in relation to unconscious bias, and following on from that, whether or not any training was given in relation to guarding against unconscious bias. There was also questioning by my learned friend in relation to racist stereotyping, and depending on the answer which he may give, was there any part of the training on unconscious bias that related to the use of racist stereotyping? So just trying to explore that in a little more detail. The second matter was that the officer indicated that he wasn't aware of racist jokes, for example, in Kirkcaldy, or people saying such things. What I would like to ask him was whether or not he ever heard any of his colleagues describing anyone black as being coloured, and what he would have done if he had heard that. Moving on, in relation to the issue of risk, this witness spoke about attending a scene in consideration of the issue of risk. He identified 3 areas of risk: the risk to the public, the risk to the police, and the risk to Mr. Bio. And he was taken to his inquiry witness statement, where at page 3, paragraph 6, he states this in the current tense: a person's race or perceived race does not increase or reduce the risk to those involved in the incident. Now, the inquiry may well come to hear from reports, including the independent review of deaths and serious incidents in police custody by the Right Honourable Dame Eilish Angelini, and also the 2016 Lamy report, in relation to the fact that there is evidence of disproportionate number of deaths of black people in restraint-related deaths. So if an incident involves restraint, race or perceived race can increase the risk if a person who is being restrained is black. And what I would like to know from the witness was, at the time of 2015, had he received any training in relation to any increased risk to black people? Was there any training given in that regard at that time? And whilst I appreciate it might not be immediately focusing on that, if the inquiry would also like to know whether or not that's a matter of training now, I can certainly add that to the questioning. The last issue arises as a result of the questions about handcuffing. You may recall that the witness was asked by counsel to the inquiry about the removal of restraints prior to being placed into the ambulance. And the answer to that from the officer was to explain about the speed at which that would take, and he wouldn't want to be interfering with the paramedics doing their work, and also that it was better to concentrate on performing CPR. And what I would like to explore with the witness was that they were waiting for an ambulance for a number of minutes, and during that time, I think it was about 8 minutes and a few seconds, Mr. Bio was to start off with unconscious, and then he was not breathing, and CPR was being done during that time, and to ask him whether or not he considered during that period of time taking off the handcuffs, and if not, then why?
Does
And
that complete your
Those
question?
complete those questions.
Well, I would not find it helpful at this stage for you to explore the present training that you mentioned, but otherwise I'm content to allow you to ask these questions. Perhaps you could just rearrange the seating so that yes, we'll bring the witness back now, please. Detective Constable, you're going to be asked some questions by Miss Mitchell, who's Senior Counsel for the Bio family.
Yes.
Miss Mitchell.
I'm obliged. Earlier in your evidence today, you spoke about unconscious bias, and you explained that you had sessions around unconscious bias, and you were asked, were you personally able to identify any areas of unconscious bias in your own mind during that training? And you responded no. Can I ask how that was done?
As far as I recall, I think there was maybe scenarios given, and you were asked to write down maybe what you thought. I'm not really sure. I can't really remember, but I know it was an exercise that you had to write things down in a classroom scenario.
Was that self-assessment?
No, I don't think so. So the classes, when you're broken up, you get like a tutor constable, and the tutor constable would obviously look at your answers and help you identify areas.
Were you given any training in relation to guarding against unconscious bias?
I don't know. I can't remember that.
Do you think you would remember had you been given training about how to guard against unconscious bias?
Not necessarily. My training was like 8.5 years ago.
How do you guard against unconscious bias?
You have an awareness, obviously, through training, but I don't know. I suppose you rely on your own sort of self to pick it up in yourself and be aware of. Do you know, if there's anything that, you know, like for example, you know, you see someone and you decide, or a group of kids, for example, and you think, well, I'm going to cross the road there. That would be, you know, an unconscious bias, because you wouldn't necessarily have to think about that. But being aware of that, you would look in, like for me, I would like looking at myself and think, right, well, that's something I need to be aware of, and you know, you wouldn't act upon that.
I think what you're describing there is conscious bias. I'm wondering how you would guard against unconscious bias.
I don't know. We've had training on it, but I don't know how to answer that question.
Were there discussions about racist stereotyping as part of your training on unconscious bias?
Again, I'd be guessing. You know, if I said aye or no, I would imagine as part of the syllabus, more than likely. But again, you would need to have a look at the kind of college notes that we were provided at the time.
And do I take it that because you're referring simply back to the time that you were training,
Yeah.
there hasn't been any training in the meantime that you can refer to answer these questions?
Not that I recall.
You've explained that you haven't heard, for example, any racist jokes in Kirkcaldy, and if you did, that you would call that out. Did you ever hear any of your colleagues using the expression coloured in relation to describing a black person?
No.
What would you do if you'd heard them say that word?
Well, that's not right. So I'd challenge them. I'd say that's not the correct thing to be saying. And aye.
Earlier on in your evidence, you spoke about arriving at the scene and the assessment of risk, and it was right back at the start of your evidence at arriving on the scene, and you identified 3 categories
Yeah.
of people or groups that would be at risk. Can you remember what those were?
Officers, members of the public, and the subject, so Mr. Byle.
In your statement, I don't think we need to take you to it. We can if you want, but it's only one phrase. You say that this is in your statement to the inquiry given on the 13th of April 2022. You say, a person's race or perceived race does not increase or reduce the risk to those involved in the incident. Do you remember writing that?
Yeah, it has no influence on an incident.
The inquiry will come to hear that there is evidence of disproportionate number of deaths of black people in restraint-related deaths. So if an incident involves restraint, race or perceived race can increase the risk if the person being restrained is black. Have you been given, or were you given in 2015, by 2015, any training on that issue?
Again, you would have to have a look at the training notes. It would be,
Well, do you recall being given any training on that?
No.
I'd like to take you on to an issue which you covered close to the end of your evidence about handcuffing.
Yeah.
And senior counsel to the inquiry asked you about removing the handcuffs while Mr. Byle was being put into the ambulance. And I think, if I can paraphrase your evidence, you indicated that it would, you didn't want to interfere with time taken away from the paramedics, and you explained it would take a couple of quite a number of seconds to remove the handcuffs, and also again you indicated that in relation to the leg restraints, you're taking seconds, which those seconds could have been better spent performing CPR. Okay. Now, we know from the timeline that a call for an ambulance was put out in respect of Mr. Byle when people were aware he'd stopped breathing at 7:25. And we know the ambulance didn't arrive till 7:34. So there's at least 8 minutes between Mr. Byle, being clear Mr. Byle was unwell and required an ambulance, and the paramedics arriving. During that time he was unconscious, and then it was clear as well as being unconscious he wasn't breathing, and CPR was started. There's only one person doing CPR at a time, I take it.
You work in a team.
Okay, so 2 at the most. Why were his handcuffs not removed during that period of time?
Again, you would require access. So to actually unlock the handcuffs, it would still involve stopping CPR, and it wasn't interfering. So again, The handcuffs weren't removed.
Why was his leg restraints not moved during that period of time?
Leg restraints don't restrict CPR
But why weren't they removed?
because they just weren't removed.
Just allow me 1 moment. Thank you.
Mr. Jackson, as Constable Tomlinson's counsel, do you have an application? I do. Thank you very much. Well, thank you very much, Detective Constable, for coming and giving evidence to the inquiry. That's the end of your evidence, and you'll be free to go when the inquiry arises.
Thank you, sir.
So, sit again tomorrow at 10 o'clock.